Once you get over the initial learning curve associated with gardening, it's likely at some point you'll find yourself with more vegetables than you can reasonably eat before they spoil. This, of course, begs the question, what do you do with a surplus? Canning is one obvious choice, and I certainly wouldn't be happy ending my tomato season without having a pantry stocked full of homemade sauce. But to be honest, home canning is kind of a pain in the ass. It's laborious, it's time-consuming, and it heats the house in the dead of summer when the air conditioning is already struggling to keep up. I'm always glad I endured the process of canning for the end result, but man, do I hate every second of it. One of the alternative food preservation methods I've added to my repertoire in recent years is dehydrating a portion of my harvest and then grinding it into various food powders. This is especially true of pepper and tomatoes. And dehydrated vegetables take up little space and are shelf stable at room temperature for a very long time, and the resulting powders are great for such culinary applications as thickening soups, stews, and chilies, and making spice rubs for grilled meats. Now, the dehydrating part is fairly easy. Reasonably functional food dehydrators can be purchased for less than $100, and anyone with opposable thumbs can presumably slice the vegetables up and arrange them on the racks. But the harder part I'm finding is the grinding. Initially, I was using a coffee grinder to make tomato and hot pepper powders, but understandably, it just wasn't up to the task. Not only does it tend to overheat and shut down during the kind of continuous operation needed to produce several cups of powder, but high sugar dried vegetables like tomatoes tended to gum up the blades, bringing the whole thing to a halt. What I was finding was that making food powders with a coffee grinder was such a tedious process that bags of dried veggies would end up sitting untouched until they lost flavor or did finally go bad. Now, recently, I decided to buy a tool purpose-made for the task of grinding food powders and purchased a fairly inexpensive electric food mill from that online retailer we all feel guilty about buying from, but still buy a ton of stuff from anyway. So here's how it held up. For about $60, I ordered this electric grinder manufactured by a company that's apparently also called Electric Grinders. To the surprise of absolutely no one, it is made in China. While the grinder has somewhat mixed reviews on Amazon, I rolled the dice and went with it anyway. I really needed something that could grind up a greater amount of material at a time than the coffee grinder, and a commercial grade unit just isn't in my budget at the moment. Okay, let's see what we've got inside the box. First up, a user manual with important safety information. Won't be needing that. Got some extra blades. And the motor, which has 2 settings and a pulse feature. Then the lid and grinding cup, which contains a cleaning brush and a sieve. The capacity on the grinding cup is 600 milliliters, which converts to a little over 2.5 cups. At this point, I'm really wondering if I just bought a rebranded blender with a lower capacity. And while assembly is super simple, it admittedly did take me a trial or two before I was able to line up the cup with the motor housing the right way to get it to lock in place, but that's because I refuse to read the user manual, as is the MO for me. Then after that, it's just a matter of snapping the lid into place, which again, that's pretty self-explanatory right there. And it's important to note, as I found out later, which is a safety feature, the motor will not run if the lid is not properly locked in place. For my first trial, I decided to grind some of my dried poblano peppers into a fine powder. And as you'll see in a moment, it is definitely not a quiet machine, but I certainly wasn't expecting it to be. After about 30 seconds of grinding, the consistency wasn't quite as fine as I was looking for, so I put it back in for another round. And I actually did read the manual later and learned you're not supposed to run the grinder for more than 90 seconds continuously in order to prevent overheating and a shortened operational life. So I found myself running it in about 30-second increments, stopping periodically to check consistency. And here, after about 2 minutes of total grind time, I had the powder to my desired degree of fineness. So far, so good. I'm really liking what it did here with the poblano peppers. This will be good for seasoning a chili when the cold weather finally arrives here in the Sacramento Valley. So far, so good, but dried peppers are an easy mode task for the grinder. The real test will be making a powder from dehydrated tomatoes. Tomatoes are a tough job on account of their sugar content, giving them a gummy, sticky consistency that tends to bind up electric motors. If my new grinder can fairly quickly churn out a few cups of tomato powder without crapping out on me, I'll be pretty happy here. Dehydrating tomatoes is a fairly easy task. All you do is cut the tomatoes into slices that are maybe 1/4 of an inch thick or so, and arrange them onto the dehydrator racks like you see here. Because I want the end result to be as dry and brittle as possible for ease of grinding, I set my dehydrator a bit hot and a bit long. I'm going 155 degrees for about 20 hours. And here's how I want my dried tomatoes right before grinding. Nice and brittle, you can hear that by the sound they make in the metal bowl here. And now it's time to get them into the grinder, see how it goes. Okay, moment, or more accurately, moments of truth time. I wound up running the grinder on this for maybe 45 seconds, and that's really all it took to convert the dried tomatoes into the fine powder you see here. I did sift the powder and found a small amount of material that couldn't pass through the screen here. This stuff can result in an unpleasant gritty texture in whatever meal you're making, so it looks like some degree of sifting is going to be necessary, but still, it really isn't too bad for a fairly cheap machine. On a whim, I also decided to grind up some dehydrated zucchini slices I had on hand. Interestingly, the grinder seemed to really struggle with this stuff way more than either the dried peppers or the tomatoes, and it kind of rapidly heated up as it worked. I think that this is due to the fact that the zucchini slices I had possessed a more leathery texture as opposed to being nice and brittle. This grinder really seems to prefer very dry materials when it comes to making powders. So far, I'm not entirely disappointed with this food grinder. It definitely churns out food powders at a much faster rate than the coffee grinder I was using previously. What remains to be seen, however, is how long it lasts. Cheap Chinese-made gadgets don't really have an especially great reputation in the longevity department, but hopefully it lasts at least until I'm in a position to buy something that's a little closer to commercial grade. And with that, until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.